Hello, seniors. This is probably the last part of the third module. We will talk about categories, predicables, and divisions, and then after this, we're going to start into all the different types of fallacies, and then we'll be able to, look through news and media outlets and see if we can't ferret some out. So anyway, let's just get started right off the bat here. Now, this first section on categories, do not feel compelled to, hurriedly scrape down the notes that I'm saying. All I'm going to be doing is talking to you about what's in the book already. I'm just going to expand on it and give you some examples. But before we get there, let me just say, the reason why we study this. With categories, the goal is to provide order, all right? So we have, natural categories. Now, natural, and again, this is in your book, natural categories, these are things that are classified by their nature, all right? Now, you're going to have to believe that things have a nature in order for you to do this. So we could probably fall back and say, well, are we in the type of moderate realism of Aristotle, like I said us as the Catholic Church believes, or are we in the nominalism of Occam? If you believe that everything is simply a made-up category, well, then you're going to have an issue with these Aristotelian categories. So natural categories, these are things classified by their natures, and conventional categories are those things that we just classify for convenience, all right? Which would be types of ice cream and things like that, okay? So anyway, what he is attempting to do, Aristotle, is he's trying to account for all that exists. He's saying all things that exist in some way or some form, find their place in this hierarchy of categories that we're talking about. So these categories, or these terms, represent the most broad of each category, and by that, they possess the most extension, right? So remember, we're up there in the population, not down in the comprehension. We'll look at the inner attributes. We were up in that left quadrant when I showed you on that line graph, where we are looking for, the extent of the overall population. So these 10 categories are really classifying things, and they possess the greatest in extension, right? He refers to them as the summa genera, but you're not going to have to worry about that. So again, don't worry about quickly scribbling down what each of these 10 substances mean. 10 categories mean. That's already in your notes, but if you want to do it now, fine. So anyway, substance, we would say, well, this is the common understanding of how we see a term. It's an individual thing, and it's an entity. Another word we can say is it's being, okay? So an example would be, we are all human persons. Human persons would be the substance in that sentence. He threw a rock at me. Rock, whatever's underlined is what I'm speaking about. Rock is the being or the substance in that. Other examples could be God, human, giraffe, table, okay? So this is the first of his categories. And some of these, and by the way, you will have to recognize these in a quiz or in an exercise. You're not going to have to memorize all 10 and then say which one is it. So picture me giving you one of these examples, and then you, through a word bank where you see all these 10, you know which one they go to. And some of these are just so obvious, I can't imagine how you'd get them wrong, all right? Anyway, quantity. This is simply how much we say of a particular thing. So if I would say that person is 5'8", 5'8" is the category of quantity. There was one rock thrown. One is the quantity of that particular sentence, okay? Other examples could be, inches, many, all of them. When you see terms like that, we're expressing quantity. The third category is quality, okay? So rather than how much, now we're saying what kind of a thing is it, all right? So we would say the person has red hair. So red is a quality of the hair. This rock was jagged. Jagged is a quality of the rock, okay? Or maybe red hair would be the quality of the person, depending on how we line it out. But other things could be qualities too, like green, it's sour, it's bad, not in a moral sense, but we don't like it, things like that, all right? So that's quality. And again, if it seems like I'm going through these a little quick, it's because this is right out of your book. The examples that I'm giving you are maybe a little different or auxiliary, but the actual definition of what each of these categories is pretty much lines up with the book and what I'm presenting here. A fourth category is relation, right? So we're just simply asking, how is the thing related to the particular thing? It could be its position. That person is standing next to me, right? The rock was thrown from the right side of the parking lot. So right side would be, that example of relation. I could say, talking to your mom or dad, you are the parent of Jane, okay? So the parent of would be a type of relation. If I were to say, it's behind me, that's the relation. If I would say, you're a child of Mrs. So-and-so, that's a relation, all right? So we're just asking, how does this, what shows the relation? It could be pretty much, in proximity where it's standing, or in relation like we would understand, like this is my cousin, things like that, okay? The fifth category is place. Now, this is simple. Where is it? The person is in the hallway. I was hit with a rock outside. Outside would be the place. Other examples of place, if you see words like there. There it is. That's the place. Or it's on the other side. Where's the place? The other side. What country do you live in? USA. What's the place? USA. All right? Pretty straightforward. The sixth one would be time. Again, should be self-explanatory. When was the thing that we're talking about? Right? So you might say, well, I saw the person on Thursday. Thursday is the term that expresses the time. I was hit with a rock yesterday. Yesterday expresses the time. I could say late yesterday. I could say in the morning. Anytime I'm trying to give some sort of understanding of when it happened, we are in the category of time. And remember, if these are, obvious to you, well then, kudos to Aristotle. He's trying to say that all things exist in one way and fashion of one of these 10 categories. So that's his point. Okay, a little bit different than the way you would understand posture, but it does include, if we're standing or sitting, okay? But we're going to say this is the state of the thing, okay? So, in other words, we could also say this is how the parts are ordered. So one type of example would be the person was sitting down. I could say the person threw a solid rock at me. All I'm saying is the rock was solid. So it's the state of a thing. Think frozen, liquid, solid. So when you think of posture, don't just think, am I sitting, standing, or kneeling? It could be the actual state of the thing. That might be a little tricky, but it's not that hard to, recall. The eighth one is possession, all right? So it could be, the position of it, or it could be how it's equipped. Let me explain. The person sitting down was not wearing shoes. Not wearing is how they are equipped or not equipped with the shoes. The person who threw the rock at me had a baseball hat on. Baseball hat on would be something that he possessed, if you want to think it that way. I'm giving you ways that you could see this, but I don't want you to always think, well, it's just what they were wearing, although it could be, okay? Other examples would be if I say something is upside down, that falls under the possession of something. If I say it's around the corner, that really looks like, I would say, place. So we're going to leave that one out. Remember, sometimes I think it does fit here, but I don't want to do anything that's a little convoluted, so we'll leave that one out. Okay, and if that one shows up on a quiz, you know me, you got it. All right, the ninth one, two more. The ninth one is action. This is really like, what actively is happening with this thing. Or the person, right? So the person was smiling at me. They're smiling. That's the action. This one's self-evident. Most of these are self-evident. That's what I mean. If you see these things in a word bank, you should be able to pick out pretty clearly which one of these are. And there's exercises in your book, all right, which you will be doing, okay? But go over them and see if any of it makes sense to you. All the answers for the evens are in the back of your book. So the action is the active action of the thing. It could also be the person who was throwing the rock at me. So throwing is the action, okay? He talks about these in terms of nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs. If that helps you to understand that, good. I didn't get into that because my gut feeling is many people don't know the parts of the sentence. No offense. If you're good at that, God bless you. But if I started only talking in terms of, well, this is usually an adjective, this is usually a noun, this is usually an adverb, that's one more thing people are going to think they have to memorize. I think it's better just to basically know what falls underneath each of these categories. That way you don't have to add things to remember. All right, the last one is passion. And this is the passive action of the thing. So possession is like, the regular action. This is more passive, right? So in other words, not what the person is doing, but what's being done to you. So some person was smiling at me. Okay, so smiling at me becomes the passion. I am being acted upon. I was hit with a rock from a guy. Okay, so hit with the rock, that's me. It's happening to me. You could use other terms like getting sick. I'm from so many allergies, I'm getting sick. Okay, that's what's happening to you. I was slapped on the back. That's a passion that was happening to me. So there's a few things here that I think might be a little different for you. Passion's probably one of them. Substance isn't that hard. I think posture, possession, and passion are the three that you might have a little issues with. But if you can memorize all the others and then just kind of know how those are different, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal for you. Okay, guys? All right, let's do the second slide, predicables. This, I'm sure, is probably a new word for most of you, okay? So what we're going to say is when we predicate something, we are saying something of a thing. We are affirming or denying the subject. So I could be saying the apple is not red. Okay, red would be, or not red, would be predicated of apple. The apple is red. Red is predicated of the apple. So we are affirming or denying something that's within the subject. There are 5 predicables, all right? Now, let me just say before we get started here that this would be one of the differences, and this would be a good question for one of your quizzes, so know this. This would be the difference between what we're learning, syllogistic logic, and symbolic logic, or mathematical logic. If you are like William of Ockham and you are a nominalist and you already don't agree that there are any natures within a thing, this will be hard for you to swallow, because symbolic logic doesn't necessarily recognize natures or essences. Syllogistic logic does. So then we can say that this predicates of something, all right? So this would be one of those differences. Just know that. Just know that, this could be that the fact that there's predicables and known natures can be a difference between symbolic logic, what we're studying, and syllogistic logic, what we're studying, and symbolic logic, which would be like in math or such. All right. So the first of the 5 predicables are known as species. Okay. Now you're going to have to realize, don't confuse this with a biological classification. It's not used in the same way. This stuff all predates, the natural sciences. So these terms were in place, and they were used elsewhere by what we call conventional taxonomy, right? They were picking how we're going to put things into particular classifications. So when we say the species of a thing, we're talking about the essence of the subject. So for an example, the species of a triangle is 3-sided plane figure. The underlying 3-sided plane figure becomes the species of the triangle. You'll see later that this kind of works out almost like a definition, but we're going to leave that for now, okay? Let me give you another example on species before I move on. If I were to talk about the species of the human being, I would say he's a rational animal. So rational animal, those two words together become the species of the human person. Genus, and again, don't get these things confused, right? This is part of the species, which means you're going to find an aspect of the genus in the species. And it's not that, if that sounds confusing to you, look at my example, right? The genus of triangle is plane figure. Plane figure becomes part of the species. The species is 3-sided plane figure. The plane figure aspect is the genus part of that, all right? This is the general aspect of the subject. So really what we're talking about here is, if you want to recall, it's comprehension. We're talking about the inner attributes or the nature of a thing. If we were to talk about the species of the human being being a rational animal, the word animal becomes the genus of human being, all right? Again, don't feel like you have to quickly scrape down these notes. This stuff is all, I'm really just reiterating and expanding on what is in your textbook. Now, specific difference. Now, if we have different things in a genus, how do we determine? Like a plane figure, there's many plane figures that are not triangles. So how is it that we determine a triangle is different from a square? Well, the specific difference separates something from other members of a genus. So the specific difference of a triangle is 3-sided. So if you look back up at species, you say 3-sided plane figure. The plane figure is the genus. But we know more things fit into the plane figure, squares, circles, and such, than just triangles. So 3-sided is the specific difference. It's what makes that particular genus different from other aspects that might fall underneath the genus, all right? And you could see, like we're going to get into in the next week or two, start talking about definitions. You could see how specific difference is so important in a particular definition. So when I said the species of a human being is rational animal, and I said the genus of human being is animal, the specific difference would be what's missing, rational, all right? So the fact that we're rational, this is what makes us distinct from other animals. And let's not get into the argument right now as to what level of rationality orangutans and giraffes have. Let's just leave it that we know there's a difference, okay? 2 more. And again, if it sounds confusing, you need to let this stuff sink in a little bit. It's really not that hard. Some of the terminology is a little bit different. But if you look up on the screen, 3-sided plane figure, Plane figure is a genus. Three-sided is the specific difference. Together they make the species. That's not that hard to understand, okay? The fourth one is property. Now, this always flows from an essence. So the difference between property and the last thing you're going to hear, accident, this one is absolutely necessary. It is always present, right? So if I said, what would be a property of a triangle? Its in three interior angles always add up to 180 degrees. That's just math. If it doesn't, then it's not a triangle. You can't take that away, all right? So we have the genus and the specific difference made up to become the species. So both the genus and specific difference, they are within the species. Properties, they flow from the essence, the nature of a thing, all right? Every triangle has three interior angles equal to 180 degrees. What would be an example of the properties of a human being? We would call risible. Now, if you don't know what that word means, our ability to laugh. We would say our ability to speak. And if you're saying, well, not everybody can laugh, not everybody can speak, we have to get into a different argument as to what may or may not be, how do you want to say, evident in that particular individual. We went over this with sacraments. For those of you that remember, we talked a little bit about the metaphysics, and we said that just there's the difference between something that's in its nature and something that's potential that hasn't been actualized, right? So a person has the ability to speak. If that's part of human nature. If one individual can't speak, we would just say, well, they haven't been actualized. Don't worry about that. I'm just saying that because it's not important now. I'm just saying that for anybody that might be having questions out there, immediately saying, well, not everybody can laugh, not everybody can speak. The potential is in that nature. All right, that's all we're saying, that particular thing. The fifth and last one is known as an accident. Okay, now accidents are not a car crash or things like that. This means it is not necessary, nor is it always present. Okay, so an accident of a triangle could be that it's an isosceles triangle, but it may not be. It might be a right triangle. It might be an equilateral. You might say it's a large triangle, but it could not be. It could be small or miniature, all right? So these things, if we took one of these aspects of the actual species away, nothing changes, all right? It's not necessary. It'd be like saying that, red is an accident of apple, because we know there are apples that are other colors instead of red. There are golden apples and such. So yes, we might associate it with it, but by no way or means is it necessary. As far as a human being, what would be accidental for a human being? Baldness, okay? Some people are bald, some are not. It has nothing to do with the absolute nature of the human person. We could be American, or we could be, from South Korea, or we could be Canadian, you name it. We could be awake, we could be asleep, okay? Any of those things are possible. All right, that's it for that. The last thing we're going to talk about here is what's known as division. Now, in your book, it talks about division and outlining. Outlining is interesting, and I think it's very important, but we're just not going to cover it here in class. We're just going to stick just with division. And again, if you have any questions on this, you're going to have to just email me, or we'll just have to talk at another time, okay? Now, remember, the goal of division is we want clear and distinct thoughts. If we are not able to think clearly, if we are not able to divide things correctly, it is going to do nothing but bring up confusion, and in other words, it's going to break down communication, all right? I want you to know that when we divide something, we discriminate. And if I were to ask you, do you think it is legitimate to discriminate? Most people would say no, because they have the idea of discrimination based on racial, creed, or color. Those things would be illicit discrimination, but we discriminate all the time. When you go and ask somebody out to the prom, you don't simply get the first man or girl that you see. You are choosing, right? You are being discriminate in your choices. When you guys may or may not want to go to a particular college, they will discriminate against you legitimately by your grade. They're not going to let somebody in there that has a 1.5 on the same level if somebody has a 3.9. Are they discriminating on those grades? Absolutely, because that is one way they are making judgments, all right? So I just saying this now, I don't want you to think that discrimination is absolutely necessary in our lives. Unjust discrimination is what we are opposed to, okay? Now, if this helps, division is always done in the external population, right? So it's always done in extension. We're not doing the division down in the attributes of a thing. We're always dividing something that belongs to the extended population of whatever we're talking about, men, giraffes, you name it, okay? What is following here is what is known as 3 rules for divisions, okay? So in other words, when we divide things, there are 3 things that we have to take into consideration, and if we violate any one of these rules, it's going to create confusion. If that didn't make sense to you, why do we have to have good division to have clear and distinct thoughts? This will clear it up, and I have examples to show you. All right, I have one I think comes out of the book, and then one I made up myself. So the first rule of division is it must be exclusive. In other words, whatever we are dividing into groups, they must not overlap. In other words, they must be distinct. Okay? So here's an example. If I were to divide high schools into public, private, Catholic, and charter schools, that violates the rule of exclusive division. Why? Because Catholic schools are also private. Charter schools might be private. So if I were to try to say, well, you know, there's 2 public schools, 3 private schools, 4 Catholic schools, you wouldn't know. Well, you're talking about Catholic schools that I thought there are private. Well, isn't that the same thing, sort of? I mean, not always, because you could be private and not Catholic, but you can't be Catholic and not private. If you get the confusion that causes, if you saw a poll that divided everything up like this, you would know it violates the principles of exclusivity, okay? We could talk about groups of people. If we're to divide people, say like in some sort of poll, we're going to divide people by race, country, and ethnicity. That violates this rule. Why? Because you could be from the same country, but of different races. You could be people of one race, but you don't simply share the same ethnicity, all right? So you could see when you're listening to the news, when you're looking at particular data for polls and such, you probably have already raised questions like this when you were reading things. Well, wait, they said that person's of a different ethnicity, but that's a race. They're confusing the two, something like that, okay? You get it. The second rule of division is whatever we divide, our divisions must be exhaustive. In other words, when we divide things into 3 or 4 groups or 2 groups or you name it, whatever it is, if we took all the members of each of those divisions, they have to add up to the whole. Are we accounting for the entire members of the particular group that we are looking at, right? Anything we're speaking of, are we accounting for all of them? So let's look at our same 2 examples in terms of exhaustive division. If we divide high schools into public and private, public and Catholic, we violate that because we are not counting charter schools or other non-Catholic Christian schools, or forget Christian schools, other religiously affiliated schools. So if we were just to say, we're going to do a poll, we're going to take a poll in all schools, and we make 2 lists. 1, well, this is all the results of public schools, and 2, this is all the result of Catholic schools. Unless we are looking for something specifically within the list of Catholic schools, somebody ought to be able to say, well, hold on a sec. There are plenty of private schools that aren't Catholic. Where are they? Did you put them in the public sector? Are they not accounted for? What about charter schools? They're not religious affiliated, but they may or may not be public. So in other words, you would say this data is very confusing. And in the end, you would say it does nothing for me. I can't make any judgments based on what you've told me. They are violating the principle of exhaustive division. An example with groups of people. Well, let's say we're going to divide people by race, which is, a human classification, and we're going to divide them into Asian, Aborigines, and Native Americans. Why is that not good? Because it violates the rule. We have omitted Sub-African and Caucasian as a race, okay? Now, of course, this all depends on the taxonomy is how we list things out, and that's not part of our argument. Right now, according to the U.S. Census, there are 5 races. We're not here to argue what is or is not a race and whether or not it is something man-made or if there's genetic things. We're just trying to say that you would know if you saw some sort of poll and it only included Asians, Aborigines, and Native Americans, but then they were trying to speak for everybody, you would say, wait, you're missing something here, okay? It's pretty straightforward, but people violate these rules all the time, all right? Maybe not as obviously as this, but still, nonetheless, they do violate them. All right, so that's exclusive and exhaustive, and the third and final division is you have to have one single standard. There's always injustices when you apply 2 standards to the same divisions, all right? So you cannot use varying standards. The example should clear this up. If we divide high schools into public and those with higher than average number of students who go to college, we're using 2 different standards. One, we're using the standard whether it's public or private. And then we're using the standard of whether or not they have people that go to college and don't go to college. So which one is it? You can't say our 2 choices are, well, here's public schools and here's schools where most kids go to college. You would say, well, wait, those are 2 different things, right? The affiliation of the high school and the performance of the student, they're 2 different standards. Okay, now again, this might be obvious, but you'd be amazed. Maybe not like Pew polls, and Gallup polls, they are quite aware of this. But when you see the news media use them as examples, you're going to see a lot of violation in these terms, okay? As far as groups of human people, if we were to again divide them by race, this human classification, we might say, well, there are humans who go to college. How did I say this? And those who, let me say, okay, we're going to divide people by race and go to college. So in other words, you are Asian, and this group goes to college or doesn't go to college. Somebody's going to say, hold on a second. There's no relation between the race and people who go to college. I mean, that's not what they're trying to say. They're not trying to say this many Asians or this many South Africans go to college. They're trying to say we have two groups. One, we're dividing you by race. Another one, we're dividing it by who does or does not go to college. All right. I'm looking at this thing, and that probably should have been worded a little more carefully. But I think you get my idea here, okay? So nonetheless, these are the concerns that we have anytime we divide anything. So we just need to know that this is the idea. You have any questions, make sure you call me. See you guys. God bless.